welcome back to the Mother Flutter podcast. And if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. Today, I want to talk about how the feminine has been erased in our culture and why it feels like it's waking up right now, and I guess just what we can do in this interim as we transition into this new world. It feels like we're about to enter the year of the fire horse, which there's been a lot of talk about, and I'm very excited about as a horsey gal. So a couple of things. First of all, I got, and this will all tie in. I got cedar fever last week for the first time. I have been living in Texas for 3 years, going on 4. And everybody told me, this is a thing that's going to happen to you. And I was like, I don't believe it. It's not going to happen to me. I was allergic to cats, and, now I cuddle them every night. Anyways, it did happen to me. And you don't actually get a fever, but it's like a cold in that, there's some fatigue, not knocked down, sleeping all day fatigue, but crazy runny nose, just irritable eyes, scratchy throat, all the things. It's kind of like being, recovering from a cold, or, when you first start to get a cold. And I had it for like 3 days, and my voice was all messed up. Last week, I was going to record the pod, had some technical difficulties, and I'm figuring out a rhythm right now. I think once every 2 weeks is going to be the cadence, and maybe we'll get to weekly at some point in the future here, but I'm going to try and not swallow directly into the mic this time. So what I learned about the cedar trees is that the reason we have all this pollen and this allergy and these allergic reactions is because there's an overabundance of male trees. So the male trees are the ones that produce the pollen that people have an allergic reaction to. And the reason that there's so many of them is because in the early 1900s, and I believe even today, people plant the male trees for windbreaks or landscaping, privacy, etc., because the female trees have berries and are deemed too messy. But the berries are what absorb the excess male pollen, so that we're not all getting allergies and sick and inflamed. If that's not the metaphor of the century, I don't know what is. And when people say, oh, fuck the patriarchy, I used to hear that and be like, oh, I don't really like that branding, because it sounds like you're saying fuck men, but that's not what it is. It's about restoring balance. And what's so interesting about those cedar trees is I've come in contact with the female trees and the berries, and they're delightful. They smell really good. Before I knew any of this, I had taken them and used them for potpourri. I'd put some on my car dash for a little aromatherapy. I'd used them in flower arrangements, and really just found them delightful. But they're messy. And I think that women are often deemed messy too messy to be leaders, right? Oh, she's going to have her period, they're too emotional, they're too up and down, unreliable. And while it's true that women are operating on this 28-day cycle where we're not the same every day of the month or the year or throughout our lives, and men have a more consistent, regular energy 24-hour cycle, that doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just that our current world and culture has come to overvalue, frankly, like the analytical and, production and logic and action and output, and undervalue, the feminine of creativity and rest and intuition and being in that receptive mode. And I want to talk about different ways that culture has done this and is doing it currently. And again, how we can kind of think about restoring balance in ourselves and in our communities, and etc. I also want to say, the last podcast I was talking about cyclical living, and be careful what you wish for, because some things just manifest like that. I was talking about how sometimes our lives, we can't make room for the new until the old is cut out, whether that's friendships, relationships, jobs. And I had something really big cut out of my life in the last couple of weeks. And I can't talk too much about it right now. On the surface, it would seem quite painful, but I'm choosing to see it, as a very necessary blessing in disguise, and that it's just, God pruning what doesn't belong anymore. And I also was talking on the last episode about, gosh, I live in Texas. We have mild winters. I really miss winter. I really miss snow. And I think a week later, we got this wild ice storm where everything was, pretty much shut down here for a few days and covered in icy snow, which I actually did love. Just the, forced rest and chill time. I'm an introvert, so, don't tempt me with a good time. Forced to stay in. But also got to enjoy some walks outside in the snow, and it was just really pretty and cool. But it got me thinking about, right after that happened, and like right during that happened, all this stuff with ice in Minnesota was going on. And I don't want to get too deep into that specifically. I will say, as former Chicagoan, former Oregonian living in Texas, I don't know a single person who agrees with what's happening. However, I'm more inclined to look at the zoom out of like, what is this media spectacle, and like what's happening behind the scenes. Like, we know that brutality is not okay. We know cruelty is not okay. That's a given. But why is it being, commodified? Is that the word? Exploited for like consumption on social media. And I just kind of see it as like this siphoning of rage and fear, and that old rule from the playbook of divide and conquer. Get people to fight amongst themselves so that they don't actually unite and realize how powerful they are to make these bigger systems, like the global files that just came out, right? To make these bigger systems that don't work anymore obsolete. Because I think if we did unite and created our own, built stronger community networks and community economies and, shared resources, it could happen relatively quickly. I mean, just imagine if people stopped buying on Amazon or something, which it's not that hard to do. I'll rent a movie on there once in a while if I can't find it somewhere, but this just got, anyways. Okay, so moving on. The reason I'm bringing this up and how it ties back to this divine feminine is there's all these patterns in our culture of ways in which these divine feminine names and archetypes have been inverted to mean something completely different. So I want to use Isis, the goddess Isis, for example. Egyptian goddess, allegedly Mary Magdalene studied under her, alchemical, dream work, all kinds of like feminine embodied anointing, magic, death and rebirth. And how, the terrorist group ISIS got to be named after this goddess, right? Because if you actually look it up, the original acronym for the terrorist group was ISIL, and at one point AQI, and then ISI. So, how Western media chose ISIS as an acronym is a little strange to me. And then you see the same thing with Cancer. And Cancer, right, represents the moon. The astrological sign of Cancer is going to represent the moon, which is the mother, the feminine, right? The sun and the moon. And how it began, how did it, become that Cancer, the disease, was named after this mother archetype figure, the moon. Allegedly, it's because under a microscope, the disease looks like a crab. But I looked up pictures and I don't really see it, to be honest. And so tying this back to ice, well, winter, again, is that dark feminine half of the year, right? Where we are in that gestation of like what's to come, in the darkness of the womb of creation, that death and rebirth cycle, of a rest, of listening to intuition. It's that time when, the veil is thin and we are, more easily able to access the unseen and, the spirit world. And ice is a symbol of winter, right? And like snow and ice, and it's this metaphor for that dark half of the year of clarity. And there's all these myths about the North Pole and the South Pole and Antarctica, and there's this really interesting legend I've been digging into a little bit in the last few months with the North Pole, and there's this myth of an inner sun, and the it's like this magnetic center of all creation, and it, the legend goes that there is this inner sun at the North Pole where like the fire meets the ice. And if you look at old maps, there's different things pointing to it where they refer to it as like the Black Rock, all sorts of very interesting mysteries related to that I've been, digging into a little bit. And it's, our compasses, no matter where we are in the world, are always going to point to the north, to that magnetic center. So it's really fascinating. And it like ice is also a memory keeper. What's frozen like can stay perfectly intact. And so I just think it's interesting that, again, this was the acronym chosen for this immigration group that is now being associated with all of this brutality and cruelty. So whether it's intentional or not, it is a pattern. And I think that that's worth noting because it's, as above, so below, as without, so within. What we're experiencing in our immediate vicinity, it represents what's happening in a wider lens. And so I do think that it's just really interesting for them to name it. And again, whether it's whether these things are intentional or not, I don't think there are coincidences, and I just think it speaks to this broader this broader trend over hundreds of years of this erasure of the divine feminine. You know, I got into this podcast via learning about the witch trials and learning that it was way beyond Salem, Massachusetts, and this little Hollywood film and you know, the crucible that we learn about. And it was like tens of thousands of women across all over Europe and all over the world, and even still today. And it's women are accused for, again, having land, having wealth, having power, agency, sovereignty, being different, being othered. And it's threading into much more than that with learning about Mary Magdalene. I think I've said this way too much. I have to do a whole podcast on her, but there's so much, and it's like, I'll just start and do it imperfectly at one point in the near future here. But I think that it just goes back to like those cedar trees, right? It's not about saying women need to take over the world, or not even women in leadership, but just like honoring feminine energy and the things that these represent and bringing it back into balance. And like, you know, accusing the berries and the feminine of being messy. Mess is what like it produces life. You know, like our menstrual cycles are messy and we're taught that they're shameful and dirty, but that is literally the stuff that makes up life, human life. And same with, you know, those berries. And it's really just like a reframe in how you look at it. And I have this theory that there were and are men in power who were threatened by a woman's ability to create life. Like, it's this really magical thing that our bodies do that men's don't. And our ability to kind of like more easily access the unseen. Not that men cannot do those things. I absolutely believe they can. Well, the birth thing, that's a whole another topic I'm not getting into right now. But even just, you know, am I ever going to stop talking about periods? No, probably not. But even the shame around the cycle, and people saying like, oh, women aren't qualified to do X job because of the cycle. Like, right before my cycle, and I've been tracking mine in a notebook, not just like on my phone, like in a notebook with different moods and all sorts of data for myself to refer back to. My intuition is so sharp right before and during, like razor sharp. And as somebody who has worked in sales for a really long time, like I consistently make more money right before my period because my intuition, again, razor sharp. I have much firmer boundaries, so I just don't have time for BS, and I'm not wasting time on BS. And I think like that's primarily it, but it has been consistent over the years. So, you know, to say that it's a bad thing, it's like we're just looking at it wrong. We're just looking at it through the cultural lens from which we've been taught to look at it. So there's, you know, no shame in that. It's like that's what we've been taught. Of course we're going to look at it like that. But as I've been learning and kind of going down these different threads, I'm calling it the red thread, which I think I've heard elsewhere, and it just all ties into like this divine feminine and energy and erasures and culture and how it's kind of reblooming, which is a wonderful thing. Oh, did I mention? So with the ice as well, I'm looking at my notes here. With the ice, so beyond just like representing winter and the dark feminine half of the year, the Antarctica stuff, like also, right, Cailleach is the goddess of winter, that the divine Crone, who reigns from Samhain, November 1st to May 1st, Beltane, and once you accept her in her, you know, Crone, hag, goddess of winterness, then she can usher in the goddess Bridget of spring, and we get, all these beautiful flowers and sunshine back. And, she represents the winter and the ice. Oh. What do we have here? So I guess what this all kind of ties back to is allowing the feminine to rise back in yourself first. Allowing that rest. Like rest is not optional. Rest and the darkness is it's not optional. And we don't have productivity, we don't have fruit, we don't have flowers, we don't have sunshine, we don't have light without that opposite half. It's like you need both for balance. Otherwise, there's a bunch of, cedar semen just floating out in the air and making us all inflamed and sick. Okay, that's what we have now. So we need things to get back into balance. And I'm kind of claiming like the year of less, of like doing less. Like I feel like I've been so in this masculine trap of like hustle and do more and more output and, more money and more working out and more like I just want to scale everything back and simplify and like create more space for creativity and play and rest and just being, like just existing, like what a concept. So anyways, that's what I have today. I do want to leave you with a couple more things. One is a quote that I heard this week, and it was that, the feminine doesn't want to be defined. She doesn't fit into like one exacting box. It's like water, like it flows and shape shifts and alchemizes, and it's again that death and rebirth cycle, like these flaming butterflies behind me, right? Like the alchemical process. So yeah, that's what I have for you guys this week. And I do want to, if you want to learn more, read more, I do have a Substack under, the publication name is under the same name as the podcast. So it's Mother Flutter on podcast, or it's sarahsprigg.substack.com. And of course, I'm Sarah Sprigg on all platforms if you want to find me there. But I'd love to hear from you all who are listening. Like, what do you want to hear about in these threads, in these red threads? I would love to take more questions from you lovely listeners, and yeah, really just get some community discussions going. So please feel free to leave a comment and make some requests, because I want this to be a bigger conversation here. But anyways, thank you so much for listening, and until next time, you all take care.